Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Jeff Taylor. I'm the president of the United Methodist Foundation of West Virginia, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this first session of the Foundation's Virtual Academy. This is the first session of 4 sessions between now and mid-November, and we're glad you could be with us tonight. Each of these sessions will be presented live, and then it's available to everyone who registered by recording. So we have over 80 people that registered for this. I'm sure they won't all be here tonight, but everyone will be able to watch the recording later. Let me introduce you to a few people. First, let me introduce you to our CFO, Susanna Carpenter. Susanna Carpenter is the producer of this series, and she'll be running things from the background. She'll also be monitoring the chat. So if you have a question during the webinar, you can use the chat feature, click on the little chat icon and type your question in, and Susanna will read the question at the appropriate time. We're asking that everyone keep your microphones muted until you're put into a breakout room when we'll have a chance to talk to each other. You've already been sent the slides for tonight's presentation. And then after the session, as I mentioned, we'll email you a link with the recording along with a survey we would ask you to complete and some additional resources. Now, let me introduce you to Kim Matthews, the Vice President of the United Methodist Foundation, and invite her to share some information about the rest of this series. Kim?
Good evening. Hello. I wanted to share some information with you about our upcoming online Academy of Faith and Generosity. We have all the dates set now. October 15th is a session called Legacy Giving During a Pandemic. Why promote legacy giving now? And how do church leaders promote legacy giving in a pandemic? On November 5th and November 12th, we'll have Grace Duddy Pomeroy with us. She is the Director of Stewardship Leaders Program at Luther Seminary. She's a layperson, a millennial stewardship leader, speaker, and financial educator based in Minneapolis. Jeff and I saw her at an event about 1.5 years ago, and as I was listening to her, I thought, I want our people to hear this. So we have brought her in to do 2 sessions, one on November 3rd called Generations and Stewardship, and one on November 12th, What's Your Why? If you registered for this event, you are registered for all of the others. We won't ask you to register again. You will receive emailed invitations to each one as it comes, so you can choose to join if you like. You can learn more about the Academy if you want to read synopses of these events or bios of the presenters at umfwv.org/academy. And these dates will be in that email Jeff mentioned, so you'll have them in a day or two in your email box. I'm glad you're here, and I hope you join us for the other sessions as well.
Thank you, Kim. Now let me introduce you to our main presenter for this evening. We're really excited about the program and about the presenter. Reverend Dr. Ken Sloane is the Director of Stewardship and Generosity for your denomination. He is at United Methodist Discipleship Ministries in Nashville. He's a clergy member of the Greater New Jersey Conference. He served in local church ministry for over 20 years, including a successful new church start. In 2006, he went to United Methodist Communications as Director of Communications. And then in 2011, he moved into his current role. I hope you're familiar with the guidelines booklets that are available from Cokesbury for church leaders in the local church. Ken is the author of the current guidelines for stewardship, and he also collaborated on guidelines for finance, as well as a lay a lay servant advanced course, and other denominational resources. I've known Ken for a little over 10 years, and I'm really pleased to invite him to virtual almost heaven. So please welcome Ken Sloane.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everybody. It's so good to be with you tonight. I'm excited to be part of this program and seeing the other folks who are coming. I know you're going to have a great academy and get it in pieces that you can digest it and hopefully try out some new ideas and put them to work. And I've heard Grace speak a number of times, and she is excellent and going to open your eyes to stewardship with the folks who are hopefully coming into our church in younger generations. So I'm so glad to be here. I had the opportunity, or was invited by Jeff, to come and to talk a little bit about what it might look like to try and put together an annual campaign during the midst of this kind of strange time that we're living through right now. And in reality, I kind of gotten a couple of questions from folks all around the same time. And so I really gave me the impetus to kind of put my head together on this. So I'm going to go and put my slides up here, if you'll just bear with me for a second here. And see if this is going to do what I think it's going to do. Okay. So we're going to talk, I'm going to lift up some key ideas, key considerations for you, maybe as you're thinking about this, wondering, in some places, as I talk with people, wondering whether you can even do a campaign this year or not. I'll throw out some ideas and put them before you. One of the things I want to say right up front is when it comes to what is going to work in your local setting, in your local church, I really believe that you are what I call the context expert. I can share a whole bunch of ideas here. When I share them with the hope that you are kind of a filter that understands what is going to work in this situation. And I know that across the West Virginia Conference, you have a variety of different churches and a variety of different settings. And so as I throw out ideas, I have a little freedom to do that if I invite you all to be the context experts and to look at the ideas I share. And you may say, you know, that's an interesting idea. It's not going to work in our church, or I don't know that folks are going to go, or maybe I'll put that on the table and see if people are going to be interested in doing it, or you're going to find some things hopefully that you get excited about. And I hope that you find this to be empowering in some ways to kind of say, hey, even in the midst of all that we're going through with COVID-19 and the pandemic and everything that's happening, that you'll still find some ideas in here that maybe will kind of prompt you. So the first thing I want to put on the table is this idea that I hear from people: we can't do a campaign because we can't do it the way we've done it before. And that's probably true in a lot of ways. I mean, bringing pledge cards to church and putting them on the plate, where congregations may not be ready to do that. This might not be the time to do that. A congregational meal, I don't think that's going to happen this fall. I don't think we're going to pack our fellowship hall with folks for a covered dish and ask them to make a commitment. The idea of in-person visitations, which sometimes is part of our campaigns, not so much, I think, anymore as a lot of places, but this is not a year to put in-person visitation on the table. But I think that none of these are really a good enough reason to do nothing and to just ignore what has been hopefully a season in your church to have a focus like it that comes with an annual campaign. I think in my mind that if we skip it completely, I mean, if you've done campaigns in the fall and that has been your practice and you skip it completely, it's almost a subliminal way of saying, well, it's really not that important. You know, we can kind of do it or not do it. And I don't think you want to have that kind of a feeling around an annual campaign. I think you really want it to be a place that kind of motivates people and gets excited and gives them a vision for a future ministry, and then moves them out to take the leadership and to do that and to make the best commitment that they can make. So my advice to you, and again, you are the context expert, is do something. And even if your budget is staying flat or decreasing, I hear that from a lot of churches saying, well, we're not going to increase the budget, so I really don't think we need to do anything. Well, again, I think this time we're living in offers some opportunities for ministries that we may not have seen before we all closed our doors in March. I think there's some new things coming in the coming year that we need to be prepared for, and we need to focus people on. And so my advice is to do something. And again, you can decide in your context what's going to work and how that's going to look. Second idea that I really like to put on the table, and this is something I think we need to continually emphasize to our people, is the building is closed, but the church isn't. And I think in some people's mind, maybe people who are a little further to the periphery and not so much of the center of your church, people sometimes get that idea that, well, if the building is closed, there's really nothing going on and they really don't need my giving. I'm happy to hear from reports of surveys that have been done that churches that saw a decline in their giving during March and April are beginning to see it come back. And I think that's wonderful. I think people are becoming to realize that, but keep this phrase in mind. And because it's an important part as we plan a campaign that people begin to see that we emphasize the fact that we are still the church, even if the doors for worship are closed. The place where my wife and I go to church, the congregation that we worship with here in Nashville, is a new church start. It's called The Village. And starting in August, my pastor did a series that I thought was a particularly good one for this particular time. And what he did was he talked about the church as being sometimes we're the church gathered. And that's the church where we come together, when we sing our hymns, when we hear God's word proclaimed, when we take the sacraments. He said, sometimes we're the church gathered. But then he said, most of the time, we are the church scattered. And he used a variety of images from, Old Testament times and from the people of Israel when the church got scattered. But even when we're scattered, we are still the church. In fact, Travis, my pastor, made the point. He said, for most of us, we're only the church gathered for 1 hour a week. We're the church scattered for the other 167 hours. And I think this is a really good theme to kind of capture what we about. We're most importantly, our most important time of being the church is when we're the church sent, when we are the church scattered. The idea is that hopefully we take God's love and compassion and we seed it in our communities and our neighborhoods. And so I think kind of embracing this idea that it's not just about what happens when those doors are open, but what happens when we let people out and we move into the community. So I think as you look at your idea of doing a campaign and focusing people on their giving, kind of keep in mind that question of where has God's love been made real by this congregation, by this church, when we have been the church scattered? Where do we see glimpses of God's love being made real? And I think those are the kind of images that move people to give and to get involved in setting a goal for their giving for the coming year. Now, I also want to mention this, and I've said this in some other webinars that I've done as we've been through this pandemic time, that I really believe that connection is more important than perfection. Now, there may be some of you out there who really want to have an absolutely perfect campaign. You would just like everything to be right, because that's the kind of people you are. You just want things to be perfect. And I want to remind you that connection is more important at this time than perfection. People are hungry for some kind of connection as we've been isolated for so long. As many of your congregations probably have had to learn how to do virtual church, adapt all these technology things to get services up on Facebook or record them for YouTube. They probably haven't always been perfect. I mean, they probably haven't looked like virtual streamed worship services that maybe you've seen from large churches that have come in different places. But know that for your people, the connection is more important than the perfection. the opportunity to get together tonight and to see faces of people that you know across the conference is a joy to know, to be able to see that everybody's okay, and that's a big part of this. And so I really think it's important for us to realize that what we really want to do is hear those messages that are out there. You know, the church reached out to me, was there for me. The church was concerned that I was okay, that everything was going to be all right with me. And so we really want to be able to kind of lift those messages up and to really make sure that we're going out of our way to find ways to be connected with people. I talk to pastors all the time who are saying they feel more connected now with the people in their congregation during the week because of the effort they've made through text or through reaching people through Facebook or just a phone call to make sure that people are all right, that people are actually feeling that they have received pastoral care in that virtual kind of way, because they know that a knock on the door is not going to happen. They know that somebody coming and sitting down in the living room for a visit is going to be a difficult thing, especially in these times. But emphasize the importance of that connection, how important that is to kind of keep that present. The idea that I'd like to lift up to you, and this is one of the models that oftentimes has been used for campaigns, is the idea of a home meeting model. Now, some of you may have tried this idea out. It may have been part of what you've done before. The idea is that instead of having a big gathering at the church, you find a number of homes of people who are willing to open their doors, and you bring in a group of, you know, maybe 10 or 12 or 15 or even 20 people into a home. And in that home setting, they have a conversation where you explain the needs of the church and the mission and ministry. Well, I think that's probably the most adaptable model that we could find for using in the situation that we're in now with social distancing. Not that people would particularly come to houses, but that you could utilize small groups on Zoom or another video conferencing platform, groups of maybe 10 to 25 people max. Groups where people have the opportunity to talk and speak with one another. I say 25 max. Some of you may know that's the maximum number that I can see of people who can be on one Zoom screen at one time. I hate to get on a meeting where I have to scroll and swipe a group of people away so I can see the rest of the people on the call. But so that's why I say small groups of about 10 to 25 people sitting at their computers, and again, you know, being there for the opportunity to kind of gather and to focus on what the campaign is about. I remind people anytime we do campaigns, one of the things that we want to focus on is our mission goals. More than just what is the budget about, we want people to focus on the mission goals. What do we want to accomplish in ministry in this coming year? What are the things that we've done in this present year, or we plan to do, that we want to do in the coming year and do them even better, reach even more people? If these meetings are centered around that focus on that mission goals, and you're able to get people to get excited about those mission goals, then getting people to support a budget that makes those goals happen is going to be so much easier. So
Ken?
Keep that in mind. Yes.
We do have a question.
Okay.
It is, how does one go about doing an online campaign when so many people still do not have online giving? And so many of our folks do not have or use computers.
Yeah. So one of the things about Zoom that we emphasize, and I don't know if anybody tonight is getting on, is that, you know, it does have an opportunity for people to get on by phone. And I think one of the things you need to do is, if you're in a community where you know some people are going to get on by phone, I think a good way to kind of to provide for that is to make sure that anything that you do visually, they have an opportunity to see or connect with. And so maybe it's done by, you know, by sending a packet of materials for them to look at with some images on it that are going to be the kind of things that are going to be shared. But using the phone as a way to do that, and again, in the groups where those, and you may want to even put those groups, those folks together. If you have a number of people in a congregation who are not going to be able to get on a computer and get on Zoom, or get on their smartphone and get on Zoom, maybe the good thing is to put those folks together. And so the nature of that meeting, the kind of guidance of that meeting could be much more focused on the audio part of that conversation and less on visuals. I think is that kind of where we're going with that? Does that sound like we've done the job on that one?
Yes,
okay.
I think so.
I'm going to assume that's okay. And if you want me to talk further about that, put it in the chat window and make sure we get to it before we conclude at the end. I think if you do these Zoom meetings in a local church, I think it's great if you have some key leadership people who can be in each of the groups that meet. Whether you're small congregations and you're only having a few meetings, or you're a larger congregation and you're having a larger number of meetings so that you don't have to have big groups and everybody gets a chance to talk. See that there's some leadership who can be present at those. In the church that I served, the new church plan, when we got ready for one of the phases of our building campaign, we had these home meetings. And I tried to schedule them so that I could be physically present at every meeting. But there were some times where people simply said they just couldn't make that meeting or whatever. We couldn't schedule enough meetings and find enough hosts for people. So in those places, I didn't have the Zoom opportunity back then when I was doing this. It was probably almost 20 years ago or more. I made a short video. Everybody could share in the context in those meetings where I talked about how this church evolved, what our history was, what our priorities were in mission, and then I cast a vision for where we thought we needed to go in terms of a building. And so, but I think key having somebody live from church leadership, whether it's the pastor, whether it's somebody from the church staff, or some key leaders who have been involved in finance and are familiar with things to answer the questions, this is kind of a key component as well. Maybe some of your churches have explored the idea of a narrative budget. I think a narrative budget is basically, it takes the numbers that are in a spreadsheet budget and does some explaining around them, put some narrative to it. When you talk about the money that's in your budget for pastoral ministry, it gives a paragraph that explains the many ways in which a pastor is interacting with the congregation and the community. When you put a line in for Sunday school, you talk about things that happen in the Sunday school program. If there's an outreach line for a food pantry or support, you share stories about how people's lives are touched by those things. So a narrative budget is something that if your church uses it, can be a great tool to use in these small groups. And in some congregations that are really bold and are exploring video technology more, you may even want to consider, is there a way to do a video narrative budget? Especially if you have some younger people who are attending. I always say, you have somebody who's 15 to 17 years old, they probably could do more with video and their camera, their phone camera, than a lot of us could do with a lot of video equipment at our disposal. And so consider if there might be a way to work with somebody to do kind of a video narrative budget that can be presented in those kind of ways. And again, including with that, what is the vision for mission and ministry that you want to go with that? And finally, I say, get as many faces and voices as possible. If you're going to put together any kind of thing to present to people, the more faces that do it are the more engaging. And so if you work on something like that, or some kind of a video that tells a story of what you want to accomplish in those first years, get a lot of faces, even if you have people only saying a few words or a sentence here and there. The more faces people see, the better. Everybody likes that. So I want to emphasize to you this idea that whatever you do for your campaign, at whatever level you do it, you need to be storytellers. You need to be telling stories. And what you want to focus on in those stories is, where has the giving that people have been doing to your church made an impact? Now, I like this image. This came from a story about a church that wanted to do something for the healthcare workers in their community. And it was a smaller church, and they couldn't do something for the whole hospital, so they picked one group. They picked one shift of the ICU, and they bought lunch for them and had lunch sent to the ICU. And of course, they took a picture there to send it back to the church and thank them for what they had done. It's a great story of impact. It's a great story of expressing love to people, especially to these heroes who are working on the front lines of the COVID pandemic. So tell your story and focus on ways in which people's giving has made an impact. Excuse me. But what I also want to tell you is that in this setting that we're talking about with these kind of small group meetings, take the opportunity to tell your story, but I also would encourage you to listen to what people have to say. And I would listen to where people are and to what they're feeling and how they perceive what the church is doing, and maybe even where they see opportunities that the church could be doing other things or new ministries that might be birthed from this particular pandemic that we're going through. And so I've kind of come up on my mind with some questions, and these are not necessarily the best questions to use, but just to give you an idea of, give people an opportunity to ask, what have been the biggest challenges of the last 8 months? And, you'll get a whole wide range of answers to that question. You'll get people who will tell you that the biggest challenge has been finding toilet paper. Or in my family, it was finding rice. Our store was always out of rice, and my wife, it's one of her favorite foods is to have a bowl of rice for lunch. But you'll hear a whole wide variety of those, and somewhere in there, somebody will tell you a story of something that was particularly challenging. Somebody will open up there and say, well, my challenge was that I lost someone very dear to me to COVID. Or maybe someone will lift a question of saying, I went through the disease, I had it, I was cured of it, but I'm still troubled by the fact that I might have passed it on to somebody else. And you'll have a wide range of answers to those questions, but it's good to give people an opportunity, especially when we've been kind of isolated and separated for so long, to talk and to share responses to a question like that. Ask a question about something along this line, but where have you seen God moving through our church? Give people a chance to tell you what they've seen. You may be surprised some of the things that people say. People may celebrate things that to you may not have known about, or you may have thought they were so small and insignificant that nobody would notice, but people did notice it. And so a question like that is a great way to open people's hearts up to begin to talk about things that made a difference. And again, they may not pick the things that you think of, but the little acts of kindness maybe, or little moments of connection, may be the things that people reach out and talk about. Invite people to focus on gratitude. What are you most grateful for in 2020? My wife and I, every evening before we have our dinner, I get the opportunity to say grace. I'm the sort of designated prayer. I try to, in my grace every night, to thank God for the things that we have, for the fact that our jobs have continued. Not everybody's have. Our pantry has enough food in it for us to put another meal together. That's not the case for everybody. We've been healthy. We haven't contracted the virus. That's not the case for everybody. What are the things you're most grateful for in 2020? And again, this may not be the way you want to word the question, but something that focuses on gratitude. And then finally, I would ask a question that would go something like this, but what new opportunities for ministry do you see for our church in 2021? What are the needs that are around us? What could we do? Maybe something brand new that we've never done before, but maybe we can get some folks interested in wading into some new water. I'm going to do a webinar at the end of this month about talking with a church that has a job networking ministry. They started it actually during the last recession back in 2008. It's a church in Atlanta. And all they do is they get together, they get folks together, and they try to bring people from the community who hire people who can come in and talk about things like what do they look for in resumes, or what kind of openings do they have, or what kind of jobs do they see coming in the future. And they connect them with people who are in that kind of employment transition time. Well, maybe that's one of the opportunities for ministry in your church. Maybe it's just upping your game in terms of a food pantry or supporting another church's food pantry or trying to get behind that. But give people the opportunity to say, what are they seeing in the community as opportunities for new places to be in ministry? So to kind of give us a little bit of practice and kind of what it might be like to talk about some of these questions, we've decided that we're going to give you a chance to break into some small groups, just like you might do in the middle of, in one of these small group kind of campaign gatherings, and give you an opportunity to talk to each other, just like we would do in that setting. So we're going to put you into breakout rooms. And here's the question that I like to put before you. Where have you seen God moving through your church in these past 8 months? Okay, well, it looks like folks are back from your breakout groups. I wish we had time to hear everything that was shared in those groups, but the hour is getting late and I don't want to keep folks too late, so we're going to move on. But I hope that was a good experience for you. I hope that in that time and people sharing with one another, maybe people you knew or people you didn't know, you got a feeling for the importance of people being able to articulate and tell stories about where they have seen God at work in the life of your church or their churches, and that you see how moving that can be to be a witness to where God is making an impact in places. And that's one of the keys, I think, in any kind of focus on this, to get people excited about giving to ministry and mission, is to see that we're making a difference, to see that there are places where we're making an impact. So I'm going to move on through my list. Like any campaign, I think it's important to kind of develop a theme to both the worship that ties people to the campaign. And I just kind of did a sort of a random search of stewardship themes and what people were using for this strange 2020 year. And I was already kind of in my mind of asking this question about, where are people's hearts right now? And I found this church that had just adopted that as their campaign, where our hearts are. Connecting, I imagine, to the passage in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, where we're told that where your treasure is, that's where your hearts are going to be also. And I just think that's a great place. I mean, we have all been in a time where we've been kind of locked up in our homes and not able to go out. And a lot of us have had a chance to think about what are the things in our lives that really matter. In some cases, I've heard people tell stories of how they're spending time with their kids and being kind of together and having to come up with ways to sort of fill summer vacation time by doing activities together has kind of brought a whole new amazing gift to their lives in the relationship with children. I have friends in my age range who are empty nesters who have their kids coming back and staying back in the house for a couple of months. That could be good, that could be bad. But I get a lot of great stories of reconnection, of families kind of coming back together. Where are people's hearts right now? And that's a great way to approach a theme that can tie worship services to a campaign, to asking people to focus on what the church means to them and where they want to see their church go in the coming year. And so keep those two connected. Now, one of the things that I also want to mention is that we're talking about an alternative way to do a campaign. And there are a lot of campaigns out there. These are some of the ones that Cokesbury provides. Some of you may have done some of these package campaigns before in the past, and you already kind of decided that one of those campaigns is just not going to fit for this particular year. And again, I think if you've made that decision, it's probably a good decision because you are the content experts for your local church. But don't rule out the fact that there may be resources in any of these campaigns that can be utilized in your campaign, whether it could be a devotional resource that you might want to use as a guide for helping people kind of focus around a theme over a period of time in a campaign. Providing family do your devotions together, to share the responsibility of maybe reading the scripture reading for each day. And during this particular time of preparing themselves for making this commitment, you could pick up on one of these little devotional resources. Some of these campaigns link to studies that can still be done. Many of them have a study component. And again, how do you do a study when you can't open the church or you can't get people together? Well, you use a conferencing tool like Zoom or like some of the other ones that are out there. Ways that people can get together. Do a conference call if you have a number of people who can't get on the computer and connect that way. You can still get together and do it. My wife is doing a book study with some of her friends who are sorority sisters in college. And they do it, they don't even get on a call. They do it on a sharing site where they write their responses to each chapter of the book as they read, and everybody contributes some idea and some new insight. So there are ways you can still follow through with the study. Many of these campaigns have some great themed letters and graphics that can be used as you prepare emails or letters that you might mail out to people. And again, there's always some sermon ideas, and so oftentimes some video content that can be used, some little promo kind of thing. So don't necessarily rule out an existing campaign that it won't work during this time of pandemic, because some of the things might not work, but some of the ideas might be great and can be adapted in this particular setting. Obviously, in this time, you want to have a heightened level of sensitivity to the fact that some people are experiencing economic hardships. This is one of the things that I try to keep before people all the time, is sometimes you may know about families in your church that are particularly affected in a negative way economically by this pandemic through a loss of a job or extra medical bills, whatever it might be. So be sensitive to those opportunities. And as you prepare material or you write things, try to keep that front and center. I just tried to give some samples of kind of the language that, I might use if I were approaching people or writing to people about the campaign this year. And I would want to say things like, we know that this pandemic has put economic stress on some of you, on top of the anxiety that we're all feeling at this particular time. But I would say what people need to hear is not what can you give to us, but to say we are here for you as a church. And we appreciate all that you were able to do for this church, all that you've done in the past. And you know what? Whatever it is that you feel like you're able to do at this point, it's deeply appreciated. And again, we understand that you're going through some tough times, and we appreciate that. That's the kind of sensitivity I think that is going to make people feel okay about the fact that they can't necessarily do what they had done in the past. But I think it's that sensitivity, that connection, that helps people feel like this really is the church that I want to be committed to. This is really the church that I want, that I believe is going to be the place where I can be sustained even in my darkest times through what we're going through in the pandemic. As I say that to you, I also want to remind you about the other side of that, and that I would invite you to be bold in how you reach out to some people about raising their commitments, about giving more, about stepping up. For some of our people, this pandemic has been the opposite of a hardship. And I'm going to use myself and my wife as an example. We feel like we have come through this pandemic so well. Our jobs were able to continue. We were allowed to work from home. I'm in my home office right now. We are not spending the money on gas to commute into Nashville every day and come home the hour that we would spend sitting in traffic. Excuse me, we don't have that in our lives right now. We have not gone out to dinner. We've done a couple of days of takeout, but we have saved all kinds of money on gas by not going out to dinner. We basically are staying at home. We are not shopping for more than what we really need in terms of groceries. We've come through very well. And on top of that, we've been healthy. We've been able to stay pretty healthy in the course of this whole thing. We realize that we're the people who have come through this really well, and we know that we can do a little more because not everybody's in that situation. We're in that kind of situation, and I'm going to bet that in your congregations, you have some people who are in that same kind of situation. It's almost, I've often kind of used the phrase, it's like survivor guilt. It's like, you know, some people are really struggling during this time, and you feel a little guilty that this is all kind of going so well for you. On top of this, you know, we got stimulus payments. We didn't need the money. We knew that the purpose of the stimulus payment was to help out businesses and things like that. So we kept looking for ways to say, how can we put this money back into the economy so maybe somebody else can kind of keep their job for a little longer. But though some of those people will be looking for ways to do that, to help in that way. And so I would invite you to be bold in saying to people, you know what, if you have survived this pretty well, and you may be in a position to help us out a little bit, because we know that not everybody can. So do that step up idea and see if that gets some traction for you. And finally, the last thing I want to say with you, which really is wisdom, I think, that goes above and beyond even this time of the pandemic, is begin and end with gratitude. Let me tell you that a thank you goes a long way. I've done workshops around stewardship and generosity for 9 years now. Today is the 9th anniversary of my coming to Discipleship to take this position. And I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, well, people don't need to get a thank you because they give to the church. That's what they're supposed to do. Well, let me say this to you. And I'm going to say this probably against my context statement in the beginning. Everybody likes a thank you. It's not a big investment. And especially when we've been through a time like this where people have been isolated and frustrated that they can't do more, a thank you goes a long way. It's a great connection. So when I say begin and end with gratitude, be lavish in the gratitude that you express to others. Go out of your way to do that. We all want to do that for the heroes, for the healthcare workers, and for the people who are delivering our groceries and all those kind of things. But for the people in your church, make sure that there's lots of thank yous there. That you thank people for their faithfulness, even in the midst of all that we've been going through, even in the midst of all the anxiety that they've had to deal with about how long is this going to be and when is it going to end? And none of us know the answers to those, or the anxiety about what'll happen if I contract the COVID-19 virus. A thank you goes a long way for all that people have done, even if we are not a church gathered, even if we're a church scattered. I would celebrate the church's ability to adapt, and I would thank those who have helped that happen. People who have stepped up and learned how to do video or do editing, musicians who have been willing to come out with their masks on and distance themselves to make some music for your worship services. People who've gotten on and made contact with people to check on people in the church to see that they've been all right. Celebrate the fact that your church has been able to, even in the midst of these challenges, to adapt. And make sure you thank those people who help. And make people feel that to give thanks for the fact that we've learned new things. And there are new things that have emerged from this pandemic. You do that with compassion for people who have been infected and affected. And I say that all the time. I said, there's a lot of pain and a lot of misery that have come with this COVID-19 pandemic. But you know what? Also what's come is courage and compassion and caring and sacrifice and dedication and innovation and people's willingness to kind of take a chance and try something new. So I would, again, lift those kind of things up and celebrate those with gratitude and keep the focus on gratitude for God's care during this time. That God has not deserted us, even when the doors to church were closed, even when we're told that when we gather together, we shouldn't all sing the doxology together. God hasn't given up on us. God has been with us through that whole time. These are the things I think that people need to hear. So those are my 10 key considerations, we're going to call them, for you to think about as you consider how you're going to mark a campaign or how you're going to mark that season in the year when we normally do our campaign and ask people to make their commitments. But I have one more thing I want to share with you, and this is something that I've shared in a few of my webinars that I've done, and I know we're getting very close to our time and we want to do some questions. But, you know, we are in the midst of this interruption, and this is, I think, a wonderful image that kind of describes it. All of a sudden, as we've been in the middle of this staircase, the middle of it has disappeared from us. And we just kind of stand there and sort of stare at it. And the question that I ask people is, what are you going to do with this interruption? And I read this quote, and I thought this was particularly good. It's, the interruptions jolt us. They upset the equilibrium. Can I get an amen from the congregation? They force a reaction. Interruptions challenge us to pause and assess what's happening. Well, this was written long before the pandemic. This was written back in 2017. But I think it's so true for what we've been experiencing. But then the quote goes on, and then we build a plan to respond, which is what we've had to do. We've had to come up with a plan. Ultimately, interruptions provoke us to act. And Tony Morgan is the author of that in his book called The Unstuck Church. Well, let me say to you that there were things that were in the wind, changes that were in place for the church. For 9 years, I've been talking about the importance of churches offering people the opportunity to give electronically. Fewer and fewer checks are being written. Checks are actually being phased out, if you want the truth. 2026 is what they predicted to be the time when checks will completely disappear. And I've been telling people, you know, we need to move to electronic giving. Well, that's been in the wind. The pandemic has made it perfectly clear to people that this is what's happening. But the idea of what virtual worship has offered to churches, I talk to pastors all the time who are telling me that their attendance on a Sunday morning for virtual worship is more than their attendance has ever been for in-person worship. And more churches I'm hearing are convinced that when they're able to go back to doing in-person worship, and nobody's saying they're not going to do in-person worship, they're going to continue to stream their worship service because it's reaching people in their community who may not be ready to come into the church building, but maybe this will be kind of a doorway for them to get used to the church service, and eventually they'll find a way to connect and to become part of that family. So what I'm going to say to you is, even in the midst of all of the trial and all of the pain and all of the grief that has come through this pandemic and this particular interruption, make sure that this interruption provides an opportunity for you to try something different. We've all had to learn some new things, to do some things differently. And we know, we've heard it from a lot of places. The normal that we had before is not going to be the normal that's going to follow this pandemic. It's going to be a difference. And so be strategic in your church about how you're going to be different when you come through this interruption. So that's what I have to share with you today. I'm sorry I couldn't get to questions a little earlier, so we have time for more. Susanna, do we have a couple that we can do?
I do not have any questions at this time in the chat box, but anyone can feel free to turn on your mic and ask or type one in.
I'm really happy that we had the opportunity to get together tonight. Again, this technology made it impossible. Many of you who are out there were not probably professional Zoom users 9 months ago, and now you are just doing it probably all the time, checking the grandkids out or doing school lessons with people. I know Jeff has probably put a lot of money into Zoom before this all happened, so the foundation's just going to ride that wave out, but it certainly has made our lives a little different, and I appreciate the fact that we can, even in the midst of this kind of time of sheltering at home, we can get together and still do some sharing.
Well, Ken, this is Jeff, and we began with gratitude, and we're going to end with gratitude. We'll still see if anyone has a question, but while we're waiting, I do want to thank you again for your presence with us this evening. One of the things that we noticed very quickly after we started staying at home back in mid-March is how gratifying it was to see how quickly and how creatively pastors and other church leaders acted to make sure that meaningful worship continued. And it's just amazing to see what's going on in terms of online worship. But then in recent weeks, we started hearing from some who said, well, we may not do a campaign this year. And then we were getting questions from some people about how do we do a campaign in a time like this. So that's why we got in touch with you, and you certainly came up with a great help to us. I think everyone is blessed to have been able to be a part of this, and we appreciate your efforts. We also appreciate Kim and Susanna and the work they put into this, and to all of you who joined us tonight, because you're not only here giving up part of your evening for this webinar, but the reason for it is that you're wanting to make sure that you're encouraging people to be generous so that ministry continues and even expands in the name of Jesus Christ throughout our West Virginia conference. So thank you for what you're doing, just for being a participant in this webinar. Please join us for the rest of our series. I think Kim mentioned that you only have to register one more time. No,
You don't need to register anymore. You
Okay.
are registered.
You're already registered, so you
You'll get
can
an
attend.
invitation and go.
You can attend the upcoming sessions, and you'll get the recordings. So with that, we will bid you God's blessings for a good night, unless anyone else has anything they want to add. Well, thank you very much.
If I could add one thing, this will be available for clergy continuing education. Once we get to the end, we'll send you a form where you can tell us which ones you attended, and we can send you the certificate. And it's part of a lay advanced course. If you're a layperson who needs an advanced course, this can be part of it, and there's information about that on our website.
If you're a lawyer, we'll even see if we can get continuing legal education for you. That's a little iffy, though. Good night, everyone.